أولنا محمد أوسطنا محمد آخرنا محمد صل على محمد آخرنا محمد صل على محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعماءه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون، الذي بعد فلا يرى وقرب فشهد النجوى تبارك وتعالى، والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء وخاتم المرسلين وشفيع المذنبين سيدنا ونبينا بالقاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. واللعنة الدائمة الباقية لأعدائهم ومنكر فضائلهم وغاصب حقوقهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم: ثم ورثنا الكتاب الذين استفعين من عبادنا. صلوات برنا. I would like to begin with extending tabrikat and special greetings on the occasion of the Wiladat of our 11th Imam, Imam Hassan al-Askari alayhi salatu wa salam. To all of you, but especially on behalf of each one of us, to the Imam of our time on the occasion of the birth anniversary of his father. When we look at the concept of Imamat, this is a pivotal foundation of our faith. And the Prophet himself, not in one place or at one time, in different places, in different occasions, he mentioned to the Ummah that inni tarikum fikum as-saqalain, that I am leaving two things behind as sources of guidance for you. One is the Quran and the other is my itra and my family. The importance of that statement is that the Prophet mentioned lan yaftariqa. These two sources of guidance, one the Quran and the other my itra, they will not ever separate from one another until they hatta yarida alayhi al-hawd, until they reach to me by the fountain of Kawthar on the day of judgment. And we see the reality. In the symbolic level, we can say that what this statement of the Prophet means, that you cannot be the true follower of the Quran if you are not the follower of the Ahlul Bayt. And also it means that you cannot be a true follower of the Ahlul Bayt if you are not follower of the Quran, because you can never separate one from the other. On a higher level, you can even see the example of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, that the enemies were able to separate his head from the body, but they could not separate the Quran from the head of Imam Hussain alayhi salam. So you can do whatever you want. Lan yaftariqa. They will never separate from one another. Quran for us is the foundation. Quran for us is the constitution. Everything else that we have to compare that with the teachings of the Quran. Ahlul Bayt and the Imam basically is the authorized mufassir of the Quran. Not only he is the teacher of the Quran, he is the true embodiment of the values of the Quran. And therefore even his actions for us are source of law and hujjat in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of the terms that we can use to explain the relationship of the Quran to the Ahlul Bayt is the concept of wirasat. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Fatir, ayat number 32. This is Surah 35, ayat 31 and 32. He talks about this concept. Where he says that وَالَّذِي أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَيْكَ مِنَ الْكِتَابِ هُوَ الْحَقُّ مُصَدِّقًا لِمَا بَيْنَ يَدَيْهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ بِعِبَادِهِ لَخَبِيرٌ بَصِيرٌ. Allah is the one who sent down, referring to the Prophet, who has sent down to you the book. And this Quran confirms the message which was sent in the previous books. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is aware and He can see what the people do. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, talking about the Quran, He says, ثُمَّ أَوْرَثْنَا الْكِتَابِ. Then we made the book. Rather, we made the book as an inheritance. الَّذِينَ اصْطَفَيْنَا, for those of our servants whom we have chosen. So Quran becomes the miras, and the chosen ibad of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, الَّذِينَ اصْطَفَيْنَا مِنْ عِبَادِنَا, become the waris of the Quran. Now who are they? It can very easily be said that, well, the ummah collectively is the waris of Quran. The Prophet left the Quran for the people, and they are the waris, and they are the one who have to look at it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains not everybody can be the waris of the Quran, because the ibad of Allah, even in the ummah, are of three types. فَمِنْهُمْ ظَالِمٌ لِنَفْسِهِ. Yet there are some among them who have been unjust to themselves. ظَالِمٌ لِنَفْسِهِ in Quran is used for the person who commits sins. When you commit sins, you are unjust to yourself, because you make yourself deserving for this punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second category, he says, وَمِنْهُمْ مُقْتَصِدٌ. And then there are those who are on the right path in a way, on the middle path. وَمِنْهُمْ صَابِقٌ بِالْخَيْرَاتِ. But there are some among them who are foremost in doing good deeds. That third group in the ummah is the waris of the kitab, and that refers to Ali Muhammad salawatullah alayhi majma'in. Salawat parne. The ayat begins and ends in these words: ثُمَّ وَرَثْنَا الْكِتَابَ الَّذِينَ اصْطَفَيْنَا مِنْ عِبَادِنَا فَمِنْهُمْ ظَالِمٌ لِنَفْسِهِ وَمِنْهُمْ مُقْتَصِدٌ وَمِنْهُمْ سَابِقٌ بِالْخَيْرَاتِ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ ذَلِكَ هُوَ الْفَضْلُ الْكَبِيرُ. This is a great achievement, and this is not something which is attained. Rather, this is a bestowal from the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Salawat par ek bar. This is the Wiladat of the 11th Imam. He had a companion by the name of Abu Hashim al-Ja'fari, who was from the family of Banu Hashim. And he narrates that when we look at this ayat from Surah Fatir, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this concept of the wirasat of the Quran, that Quran was given as an inheritance to a group, and that refers to the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. Under this verse, according to Abu Hashim al-Ja'fari, he quotes the 11th Imam, where he says, كُلُّهُمْ مِنْ آلِ Muhammad. All three categories here refers to the Ummah in relation to Ali Muhammad. الظَّالِمٌ لِنَفْسِهِ الَّذِي لَا يَقِرُّ بِالْإِمَامِ. The person who is unjust to himself is the person who does not accept the Imam. وَالْمُخْتَصِدْ, the one who is in the middle path. الْعَارِفْ بِالْإِمَامِ, he is someone who knows the Imam and acknowledges the imamat of the Imam of the time. وَالسَّابِقُ بِالْخَيْرَاتِ, and those who are foremost in doing good deeds. Al-Imam. 11th Imam says it refers to the Imam of the time. And so this ayat actually says that Quran was made as a miras, and the legacy from Rasulullah to the Imam who came after him. Salawat pढ़ने एक बार. And since this is a close relationship between the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt, and the Imam becomes the waris of the Quran, one of the duties of the Imam is always to defend the Quran. And I would like to use this occasion to talk about only one or two examples from the life of the 11th Imam to understand this phenomenon of defending the Quran. It is a challenge, even now, because there are challenges against the Quran, not only from non-Muslims. Unfortunately, we live in a time where we see the opposition to the Quran even from those who call themselves Muslims. There is an interesting ayat in Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the day of judgment, and He says that on that day the Prophet will come and complain, and the wordings are in the Quran, Ya Rabbi inna qawmi ittakhadhu hadha al-Qur'ana mahjura, that, oh my Lord, my people, qawmi, my people have forsaken the Quran. Mahjur from hajar, hajir, hijrat, which means my people have migrated away from the Quran. And this is something not only done individually, where many people know the Quran, the values of the Quran, the teachings of the Quran, the ahkam of the Quran, but on a practical level, sometimes they give in to the desires. But they do not question the authority of the ayat of the Quran. They know they are sinning, but they still accept Quran as kalam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they realize that they are making a mistake. The problem starts when people look at the Quran and would like to impose their own views on the ayat of Quran. Unfortunately, even among some of the Muslim intellectuals these days, there is a discussion not about the ayat of Quran dealing with Tawheed and Qiyamat and Nubuwwat and things like that. Rather, the ayat of Ahkam, the ayat which deals with our, practical issues. They look at some of the values of the Quran and they see they are not in sync with the modern lifestyle, with the secular way of thinking in the West. And they say we have to modernize the Quran. We have to, basically tamper with the understanding of the Quran to bring it in line with the modern thinking. And I'm not just making this up when I say that there are some Muslim intellectuals who go to the extent of saying that if you have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights on one side and the Quran on the other side, and if you see there is a conflict between what the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says with what the Quran is saying, they will not say we have to reconsider what the Universal Declaration says. They will say no, we have to do new tafsir of the ayat of Quran so that it goes in accordance with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a human product, whereas Quran is a wahi of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But they are Muslims, educated Muslims, intellectual Muslims who now think in this way. And this is where we have to realize when we talk about defending the Quran, of course, the primary duty falls on the Imam, who is the waris of the Quran, but we also have to be always there, vigilant, to defend the Quran and the values of the Quran. Salawat pढ़ने एक बार. One of the examples, which are very trendy, way of, talking, sometimes, unfortunately, I even hear from the podium and the minbar also. We are told that the inheritance laws of Islam are unfair and biased against women. And they would go to the extent of saying that this ayat of Quran dealing with the laws of inheritance are for those days. For the Arabian society in the 7th century of the Common Era, they do not apply to us during this time. They would like to suspend, some ayat of the Quran when it comes to our practical life. And they actually use this example of the inheritance of the daughter against the inheritance of the son. And you know the Masail very clearly that in most cases, the son inherits double of the share of the daughter. And so they come up with a conclusion and they say that, in Islam and in the Sharia laws and in Quran, women gets lesser share compared to men. I would like to, connect this with one of the sayings of the 11th Imam on this issue. But before that, let me just, clarify this concept. Number one, this statement that women get lesser share compared to men is not an accurate statement. Because the shares of women in inheritance from the Sharia perspective are of different kinds. There are different situations, and the shares would change from one situation to another. For example, there are situations, because they are comparing men to women, male to female. There would be a situation where, for example, a person dies and he leaves his parents and children as the waris and the inheritor. They are the heirs of his estate. What is the division there? Look at the case of the father and the mother. The father gets 1/6 and the mother also gets 1/6, depending on the situation. Although the father is male and the mother is female, we still believe in that concept of difference there. We don't believe in other kind of marriages. And this is where we see that although the mother is female, but her share is same as the share of the father who is the male. And so this is one example where you see that both genders of the same category get equal share. Then you look at another example, the opposite of that, where the female gets less. And this is the example of the son and the daughter. If a father, for example, dies, leaving his children as the heirs, and there is a son and a daughter, the son will get double of the share of the daughter. Then there is a situation where, on gender lines, it can even be different, where the female might end up getting more than the male. For example, if a person dies, leaving his father and his daughter, the father gets 1/6, and the rest goes to the daughter. Although the father is male and the daughter is female. Even if there is a person who dies and his children died before him, and his grandchildren end up inheriting him. There also it's very interesting. You could have what we call Nawasi. Let me say it in English here first. A person dies, his sons are already dead, and then his daughters are also dead. The daughter of his son will inherit double of the share of his grandson from his daughter's side. It's female versus male, but the female ends up getting double because she is daughter of the son and the other is the daughter of the daughter. And so when you look at the Islamic Sharia, the point here I'm trying to make is that the division of the shares in inheritance is not based on gender or sexist issue. It's not about male and female, because you see these different varieties of shares between the genders of the same class and the same level. And so the statement that women get lesser of the share of the men in Islam is not accurate. The accurate statement would be that in some cases, women get lesser of the share than that of the men. And this brings us to this question, why? Yes, we say in some cases this is what is happening. Why is it happening? Is it because Islam believes that women are lesser, in importance and value than the male? No, that is not the case. Islam, you see, we have to understand Islam within its own perspective. We cannot impose other perspective on Islam. Islam basically, when it looks at the issue of inheritance, what is inheritance? Inheritance means the wealth of one generation is now being transferred to this second generation. The father dies, the estate is going to the children. And so when you talk about this transfer of wealth from one generation to another, what are the standards you use for division? Islam looks at this issue from the perspective of duties and responsibilities, not from the perspective of hukuk and my right and your right. What Islam says is that we will look at the second generation. We will look at the level of the burden of responsibility put on one compared to other. Wherever the level or the burden of responsibility is more, the share of inheritance will be increased in that case. Now look at the Islamic perspective. A person dies leaving a son and a daughter. In normal situation, Islam says that the son who is going to get married and is already married and his own wife and children, from the Sharia point of view, he is responsible to maintain his wife and children. It is wajib on him to provide the nafaqah for his wife and children. When you look at the case of the daughter, that's not the case. Islam says that she becomes the responsibility of her husband. It is her husband who has to provide for her, maintain her, and give nafaqah. And so because the responsibility and the burden is more on the male, Islam would divide the wealth from one generation to another according to the level of responsibility, and the son will end up getting double of the share of the daughter. Salawat. So it has nothing to do with the gender. It has nothing to do with the issue of being male or female. It has everything to do with the economic responsibility that Islam has put on the man compared to the woman. Just one statement before I go to the hadith of the Imam. Muhammad bin Sinan, he wrote to Imam Ali ibn Musa Rida alayhi salatu wasalam, on this issue, that why the women end up getting less in inheritance compared to the male members of the family. And our eighth Imam, the answer that he gave, there were two things he mentioned. Let me describe to you the second one. He says, عِلَّةٌ وَعِلَّةٌ أُخْرى في عطاء الذكر مثل ما تعطى الأنثى. The second reason that the male member ends up getting double of the share of the female. لأن الأنثى في عيال الذكر, because the female will be the responsibility of the male. She as the wife will become responsibility of the husband. إن احتاجت وعليه أن يعولها وعليه نفقتها. In whatever she needs, the husband has to provide for her, and it is wajib on him to maintain her and provide maintenance to her. وليس على المرأة أن تعول الرجل. It is not the duty of the woman, the wife, to maintain and provide for the husband. So even if she has money, she comes with the money from with her family, or she is earning, even if you have allowed her to work, you cannot demand her to help you in maintaining the family. If she does it, it is her gift to you. Remember that. It is not her duty. I don't think situations here in the East are that much, but if it is there, you have to realize. The husbands have to realize this is, her gift to the husband. It is not her duty to share her wealth with the husband, because it is the husband who has been given that responsibility. And therefore, Imam says, وَوُفِّرْ عَلَى الرِّجَالِ لِذَلِكَ. And that is the reason why, when it comes to inheritance, the share of the man has been increased. Salawat Akbar. Our 11th Imam, one of the students that he has, by the name of Al-Fahfaki, he asked this question in a very passionate manner. Although this is not a recording of the voice, but if you look at the wordings, it seems he was very, passionately promoting what we would say women's rights of the modern times. He says, ما بال المرأة المسكينة الضعيفة تأخذ سهما واحدا ويأخذ الرجل سهمين. He says to the Imam, why? Why this poor and weak woman takes one share from the inheritance, whereas the male takes double of this share? فقال أبو محمد العسكري عليه الصلاة والسلام Our 11th Imam responded to him by saying, إِنَّ الْمَرْأَ لَيْسَ عَلَيْهَا. Now, different duties that we have in Sharia regarding male and female. Now, he's counting the difference. He says, number one, a lady has no responsibility when it comes to jihad, even to support financially when it comes to the matter of jihad. وَلَا نَفَقَ. She has no duty as far as maintaining the family is concerned. وَلَا عَلَيْهَا مَعْقُلَةٌ. Ma'qula is not just common these days, especially in the Arab society. If in the tribal system, if something was done one tribal member to another, and when it came to the issue of compensation for the other tribe, if that individual could not pay, then the whole tribe was collectively responsible. They had to come up with the money in order to give the compensation to the other tribe. And Imam says in that case also, the money will only come from the men and not from the women. إِنَّمَا ذَلِكَ عَلَى الرِّجَالِ. When Imam mentioned this, that this is the reason. And so the division that you see in inheritance between the shares of the son versus the daughter is not because they are of different genders. One is male and the other is female. One is superior and the other is inferior. It has everything to do with the economic and financial burden that Islam has put on the male member of the family. So it's nothing to do with the sexist view that, women are lesser in Islam. And when Imam explained this, rationale to Fahfaki, Abu Hashim al-Ja'fari, whom I mentioned earlier, He was there, and he's the one who says that this fellow asked this question, and Imam responded to him in this way. And Abu Hashim Ja'fari, who was there, he says, فَقُلْتُ فِي نَفْسِي. He says, when I heard this answer of the 11th Imam, I said to myself, means I was talking to myself in my mind, قَدْ كَانَ قِيلَ لِي أَنَّ ابْنَ عَبِي الْعَوْجَةِ سأل أبا عبد الله عن هذه المسألة فأجابه بمثل هذا الجواب. Abu Hashim al-Ja'fari says, in my mind, I was saying to myself that I have been told by others that during the days of the 6th Imam, there was a person by the name of Ibn Abi al-Awja who had asked exactly the same question like this one to the 6th Imam, and the response of the 6th Imam was exactly same as the response of the 11th Imam. Now this is Abu Hashim Ja'fari only thinking about it, saying that in his own heart and mind. He was not verbalizing this idea or thought. And that is where the 11th Imam looks towards him. And he says, نعم هذه المسألة مسألة ابن عبد العوجاء والجواب منها واحد. Yes, Abu Hashim, the thought that you had in your mind and heart, this is true. This is the question which was asked of the 6th Imam by Ibn Abi al-Awja, and our answer is the same. إذا كان معنى المسألة واحدا جرى لآخرنا ما جرى لأولنا. When the question is same, the response is same from the first Imam or the last Imam. أولنا وآخرنا في العلم والعمل والأمر سواء. All our Imams, all of us, when it comes to knowledge and the right of obedience towards us, all the Imams are same. وَلِرَسُولِ اللَّهِ وَأَمِيرُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ فَضْلُهُمَا. Of course, the status of Ali and Rasulullah, they have their own special status. Salawat. Imam could read the thoughts and the, ideas which were coming in the mind of Abu Hashim al-Ja'fari. And this is one example of what we call ilm al-ghayb, the ability to know what's going on. There is no barrier to that knowledge, neither in form of, the veils on the mind or the wall and the distance between the Imam and the followers. Salawat Prandik Barat. In another situation, one of the Sahabi of the 11th Imam, since I used this example of defending the Quran, defending the laws of the Quran, and the example I used was the laws of inheritance, let me now describe one situation. Whenever we say that the daughters get half of the share of the son, because the son has the responsibility to maintain his wife and children, whereas the daughter becomes the responsibility of her husband, we are told, well, situations are not always same. You could have a situation where the husband, the son is well-to-do. He doesn't need the inheritance. Whereas the daughter might be married to somebody who really is struggling. So how do you deal with that kind of situation? Where Islam has laws which are flexible. We have a concept in Islamic inheritance which is known as 1/3, which is actually what is known as a wasiyyat. Islam says that when a person is about to die, or even long before he's going to die, what right do you have over your estate? Islam doesn't believe that you have absolute right. Islam says that whatever you are going to leave behind as your estate, you only have right in 1/3 of it. You can write in your will about the 1/3, up to 1/3. and designate that to any cause or any person that you want, within the family, outside the family. You want to give it for khairat, to the Jamaat, or to other causes, it is your choice. And that 1/3 option that the Sharia has given, you can use that. If you realize that you have a son who is not in need, and on the other hand you have a daughter who needs more than the son, you can always use up to 1/3 to allocate that to that one member of the family that you think needs more. Then the 2/3 would be divided according to the criteria that we mentioned earlier. And in that case, you can even equalize the inheritance of the son and the daughter, depending on how you use the 1/3 option which has been given to you. And so it's not that, when Islam looks at fluid situations, there is no solution to that. No, there is a solution in the Sharia laws itself. Salawat alayhi wa sallam. A companion of the Imam by the name of Muhammad bin Hassan al-Saffar wrote to the 11th Imam, asking this question. He says, رَجُلٌ أَوْصَى بِثُلْثِ مَالِهِ فِي مَوَالِيهِ وَمَوَالِيَاتِهِ. There is a person who wrote the 1/3 in his will for his, those people who are related to him, male and female. In that case, he's asking the question, الذكر والأنثى فيه سواء أو للذكر مثل حظ الأنثيين من الوصية. He says in this 1/3 option which is given to the man or a female, that when they talk about their wasiyyat, and he wants to use that for male and female in the family or outside, does he use it equally if he wants? Or again, there also the ratio would be that the male will be getting double of the share of the female. And this is where the Imam wrote to him, فَوَقَعَ عَلَيْهِ السَّلَامِ. Imam wrote the response saying, جَائِزٌ لِلْمَيِّتِ مَا أَوْصَى بِهِ عَلَى مَا أَوْصَى بِهِ inshallah. Imam says it is permissible for the person to write in 1/3 whatever he has written, the way he has written. So this option has been given by the Sharia to an individual in the 1/3. They can use it in whatever way that they want. Salawat alayhi wa sallam. आखिर में सिर्फ एक वाक़े को बयान करने के बाद महफिल को ख़त्म करना चाहेंगे. I don't know time 45 minutes था या 1 hour, but anyway हम तो जाने वाले हैं, लिहाजा नाराज़गी आपके साथ रहेगी. बात कुरान की हो रही थी कि रसूल इस्लाम ने 2 चीज़ें छोड़ी हैं, कुरान और अहले बैत. और अहले बैत, इमाम जो है वारिस कुरान है. आइम्मा की ज़िंदगी में अगर आप देखें, वक्त ये नहीं है कि दूसरे आइम्मा के बारे में कुछ कहा जाए. अभी जहाँ जहाँ कुरान को ज़रूरत पड़ी है अपने दिफा के लिए, तो हमारे इमाम हमेशा आगे आगे रहे. इमाम हसन अस्करी अलैहिस्सलाम की विलादत का ये जश्न है. उसी मुनासिबत को जहन में रखते हुए एक वाक़या है इस सिलसिले में कि किस तरह से 11th इमाम ने अपने ज़माने में कुरान का दिफा किया है. इमाम के कंटेम्प्रेरीज़, हम असर में एक शख्स था जिसका नाम था इसहाक़ अल-किंदी. ये मुसलमानों में जब हिस्ट्री ऑफ फ़िलासफ़ी लिखी जाती है तो पहला नाम लिस्ट में आता है इसहाक़ अल-किंदी, फर्स्ट मुस्लिम फ़िलासफ़र. और ये 11th इमाम का कंटेम्प्रेरी था, उसी ज़माने में हम असर था. इसके कुछ स्टूडेंट्स थे जो इमाम के भी सहाबी थे. वो वहाँ भी जाते थे उसके पास और इमाम के पास भी आते थे. इमाम को इत्तला मिली कि इसहाक़ अल-किंदी ने एक किताब लिखना शुरू की है जिसका नाम था अत-तज़ाद फ़िल क़ुरआन, कॉन्ट्रडिक्शंस इन द क़ुरआन. यानी वो मुसलमान होते हुए भी ये किताब लिख रहा है कि कुरान में कहाँ कहाँ کانٹرڈکشن ہے ایک آیت میں دوسری آیت کے ساتھ۔ امام کو جب خبر ملی، اور امام جانتے تھے کہ ان کے کچھ کمپینینز جو اس کے پاس بھی جاتے ہیں بیٹھتے ہیں، دے نو ہم، تو امام نے کہا کہ کیا تم میں کوئی رجل رشید نہیں ہے، کوئی وائز انسان نہیں ہے جو اس کو جا کے سمجھائے، نصیحت کرے کہ یہ غلط ہے وہ کر رہا ہے، یہ جو کتاب لکھ رہا ہے التضاد فی القرآن۔ تو امام کے کمپینینز نے کہا کہ وہ ہمارا استاد ہے، فلسفی ہے، فلسفر ہے، ہم لوگ کیا اس کو جا کے سمجھائیں گے۔ تو پھر امام نے کہا کہ اچھا دلیل ہم تمہیں سکھاتے ہیں، آیا تم میں سے کوئی ہے تیار کہ جو ہم دلیل تمہیں سکھائیں گے تم جا کے اس کو سمجھاؤ؟ تو یہ تیار ہوئے اس میں ایک۔ پھر امام نے ان لوگوں سے کہا، سمجھایا کس طرح سے اس کے سامنے جا کے اس آرگیومنٹ کو پیش کرو۔ اس نے اس آرگیومنٹ کو سمجھا امام سے، اور تیاری کرنے کے بعد اپنے دوستوں کے ساتھ وہ گیا اسحاق کندی کے پاس۔ اسحاق کندی سے اس نے کہا کہ استاد یہ جو آپ کتاب لکھ رہے ہیں اس کے بارے میں ایک سوال ہمارے ذہن میں آیا ہے۔ استاد نے کہا کیا سوال ہے؟ آپ نے قرآن کی مثلا ایک آیت کو لیا، اس کے معنی کو سمجھا، پھر آپ نے دوسری آیت کو لیا، اس کے معنی کو سمجھا، اور دونوں آیت کے جو میننگ کو آپ نے سمجھا ہے وہ بظاہر جو ہے کانٹرڈکٹری ہے، لہذا آپ نے اس کو لکھ لیا ایز این ایگزامپل آف کانٹرڈکشن ان دی قرآن۔ لیکن کیا یہ ممکن نہیں ہے کہ آپ نے جو اس آیت سے سمجھا ہے وہ صحیح نہیں ہے؟ کانٹرڈکشن اس لیے آ رہا ہے کہ آپ کی انڈرسٹینڈنگ صحیح نہیں تھی۔ میں بھی اسی آیت کو اگر کسی اور طریقے سے ایکسپلین کیا جائے تو اس کا کانٹرڈکشن اپیرنٹلی جو کانٹرڈکٹری بات نظر آتی ہے وہ ختم ہو جائے گی۔ اسحاق کندی عالم تھا، فلسفی تھا، تھوڑی دیر اس نے غور کیا اپنے شاگرد کی بات کو، اور اس نے کہا کہ یور پوائنٹ از ویلڈ، تمہاری یہ بات صحیح ہے، لیکن وہ استاد تھا، اس نے کہا بات تو تم نے بہت صحیح کی ہے یہ، لیکن تمہارے دماغ کی بات نہیں ہے یہ، ہم تمہارے لیول کو جانتے ہیں، کس نے تم کو سکھایا ہے؟ اس نے کہا نہیں استاد ہمارے ذہن میں بات آئی ہے۔ اسحاق کندی نے کہا نہیں ہم تم کو جانتے ہیں، یہ تمہاری بات نہیں ہے، تمہیں بتانا پڑے گا کس نے تم کو یہ سکھایا ہے۔ تب جا کے اس نے امام حسن عسکری علیہ السلام کا نام لیا۔ اسحاق کندی نے جب یہ سنا تب کہا کہ یقیناً تم نے اب حق کی بات کی ہے، اس لیے کہ اس قسم کی باتیں جو حکمت کی بنیاد پر، علم کی بنیاد پر ہو، صرف اسی گھرانے سے آ سکتی ہیں جو علم کا گھرانہ ہے، اور اپنے پورے مینسکرپٹس کو جمع کرنے کے بعد اس کو ڈسٹروئی کر دیتا ہے۔ یعنی اگر ہمارے امام نہ ہوتے تو ایک بہت بڑا خطرہ تھا عالم اسلام میں قرآن کے سلسلے میں۔ قرآن کو محفوظ کیا ہے، اس کو بچایا ہے، اس کے انٹیگریٹی کو بچایا ہے امام حسن عسکری علیہ السلام نے۔ صلوات پڑھنا ایک بار۔ خداوند اس قلیل بات قبول فرما، ہمارے گناہوں کو بخش دے، ہماری توفیقات میں اضافہ فرما۔ خداوند جہاں جہاں مسلمان خصوصاً شیعہ علی پریشان حال ہیں ان کی پریشانی کو دور فرما، خصوصاً وہ شیعہ جو سلفی ٹیررسٹ کے ٹارگٹس اور شکار بنے ہیں، خداوند ان کو اپنے حفظ و امان میں رکھ، اور جو سلفی دشمن ہیں اگر قابل ہدایت ہیں تو خداوند ان کی ہدایت فرما، اور اگر قابل ہدایت نہیں ہیں تو ان کے شر کو مؤمنین سے دور رکھ، امام کے ظہور میں تعجیل فرما۔ ربنا تقبل منا انك انت السميع العليم۔